Mysterious places that have sometimes been destroyed, or left contaminated, or simply abandoned in the furthest reaches of the planet.
Some of the buildings look as though they're clinging onto the rock for dear life. If you walk out of the front door, it's just a sheer drop.
You've got bathtubs full of sand. The only thing that this is home to now is the desert.
Casualties of war, natural disasters, or events far more surprising.
What was left behind was so strange and eerie. This town was now covered in a layer of something really mysterious.
It's the victim of something that most of us couldn't believe could happen.
These are the world's 5 strangest ghost towns. They are places now abandoned. Their ruins shrouded in mystery. But within their decaying structures are the echoes of history. While many are associated with dark times, they are also reminders of human ingenuity and endeavor. Now, each haunted shell is ready to be unmasked to tell its own unique story. In the heartlands of Argentina in South America, there is a strange and eerie sight.
It looks like a post-apocalyptic landscape. The only access is down this potholed track. It really gives you this feeling of, this place is creepy.
Everything is dusted with white. The remnants of trees look like something fossilized. You really can't tell what created this strange ruin.
Walking down the main arteries of the town is a surreal experience. It's as though someone just snapped their fingers and everything's gone, only slightly distorted.
It has this really eerie, ghostly feel to it. Staircases that lead to nowhere, or kind of corroded structures.
The parched, barren landscape gives us no real hints about the town's history. But the first real clues are provided by the white substance that clings to every surface.
It looks like it could be ash. You have to wonder, was it bombed? If so, why? By who? Did anyone survive? What happened here?
There's swimming pools, and you can see the remnants of cafes.
There's children's playgrounds with swings and slides that are just almost frozen in time and look as though it's some kind of a haunted film set.
So clearly this was not a military site or something like that. It was apparently a lovely place in its day.
It appears that this place could have been burnt to the ground. Or could that strange white substance reveal a far more curious story? Today, the streets have a haunted, desolate, almost forsaken feel. But, incredibly, there is still one man who calls this ghost town home.
I am Pablo Novak, the only resident left in the ruins. I was born here, my 2 brothers also. On the 25th of January, I turned 88 years old.
For the last 10 years, Pablo has been living here on his own, the only resident who refused to accept defeat.
I stayed, and I was sure someone would come back eventually. It used to be so famous. So many people used to come from all over.
Although it's a little hard to imagine today, for more than half a century, this was a luxurious retreat that catered for the elite of Buenos Aires. During that time, many thousands came for a break from life in the city.
A railway line was built from there to Buenos Aires.
By the mid-20th century, it had grown into a lovely little resort. You would have as many as 25,000 people a year coming to visit.
What they all came in search of is still visible today. They were the supposedly healing waters of a nearby lake and spring. Those waters have since crept into the heart of the settlement. This is all that remains of the town of Villa Ipiquen.
Throughout history, humans have gravitated towards hot springs, waters with a lot of minerals in them, with the idea that this is good for your health.
Legend has it that the lake was formed from the tears of a great chief who was crying over the loss of his true love.
The therapeutic powers of the lake had been famous for centuries, and it is said that the spring could cure all sorts of things, from depression to rheumatism.
It started off as a sleepy village, but then grew to this bustling tourist resort.
But those who flocked to the town to take advantage of the waters probably had no idea that they also held hidden dangers. So the town just kept on growing. Hotels for the visitors were built. There was even a slaughterhouse to provide meat for everyone. It had all kinds of attractions.
This was started as the Recreo Almaza, a dance hall. And because the room was small and lots of people came, they also used it for a theatre, with theatre companies coming from Buenos Aires.
So the town flourished, and its future seemed bright. But then, disaster struck.
In November 1985, it started to rain, and the thing is, it never stopped. The rainfall was reaching record levels, and the lake was threatening to burst its banks.
What was once the lifeblood of Villa Ipiquen was about to become the cause of its downfall.
A particular problem where you have big water bodies that are bound by land is a phenomenon called the seiche. And it's very much like when you're in a bath, you're sort of playing around in a bath, and occasionally, poof, up in your face, you get this freak wave. And that's because you've got all of these different waves interacting, and eventually they all come together and make a much larger wave. And that's thought to be what caused the demise of the flood defenses in this particular town. And once the flooding started, then essentially the floodgates were open.
The residents of Villa Ipiquen had no choice but to flee to higher ground.
Fortunately for the residents, the water rose slowly enough they had time to get out, but not a lot of time. So 1,500 people just had to pack up and move in a matter of days.
The floodwaters gradually, slowly consumed the entire town, and by 1993, it was submerged under 30 feet of water, effectively becoming a modern-day Atlantis.
Everything that you can see now hadn't been seen for 20 years.
As the years passed, the waters slowly began to recede. But the waters that were once restorative and healing have left a lasting scar upon the landscape.
When the town was exposed again, of course, a lot of the buildings had collapsed, but everything was covered with this eerie coating of white.
And the twist is, this highly saline water left the town covered in a thick layer of salt, giving it this unique appearance as though it's been bombed and covered in ash.
The same minerals that had drawn people to the hot springs to soak their aches and pains away now coated all the buildings of the village.
Now, although the remains of Villa Ipiquen are standing above water once more, the town can never regain its former glory. But Pablo Novak is still determined to remain here.
When I turned 70, my daughters gave me money, as they thought I couldn't live here alone anymore. But I'm 88 now, and still here. And as long as I can walk, talk, and have a good memory, I will stay here.
In the southern Mediterranean, in the arch of the famous Boot of Italy, is a truly extraordinary sight that overlooks an almost lunar landscape.
This rock sits in the middle of an area known as the Badlands. It's an unpopulated area, empty as far as the eye can see.
Yet, built on an imposing mountain some 1,300 feet above the surrounding plains, there's a remarkable town.
It's a stunning sight. You can hardly tell where the cliff face ends and the masonry begins. It's almost as if they've organically integrated their town with the rock itself.
Some of the buildings look as though they're clinging onto the rock for dear life. And in one instance, if you walk out of the front door, it's just a sheer drop.
The engineering involved must have been fairly impressive, particularly moving a stone and rock around, cliff edges and so on. How the hell would you build something up there?
As you get closer, there's another layer to this mysterious, dramatic-looking site.
When you look closer, you can see the buildings have been battered and light is streaming in through the missing church dome. The whole thing is virtually flattened, and it makes you wonder what happened here. Was it bombed? Did anyone survive?
The abandoned, weather-beaten buildings suggest that this settlement was occupied for many centuries. From the top of the town's imposing tower, local guide Saverio Grippo explains what makes this place so special.
As you can see, we are on the top of the tower, and you can understand how important was this location to have a wide view and dominate all the territories. In fact, from here, we have a 360-degree panoramic view.
This is Craco. Built in the Middle Ages high on a steep mountain, Craco was built here for a very specific purpose.
When you look closer, you can see that the part of the town that is in the best shape is actually the oldest section. It was built on solid rock and built to withstand military attack. And that's still standing today.
The heavy tower, with its arrow slits and fortifications, gives a hint when this village was built, because it was at a time when Islamic pirates roved the Mediterranean and frequently raided inland. This was a defensive village.
But a closer look reveals that this is not simply a ruined medieval town.
A modern community lived here. It's something that was destroyed recently. The question is, how and why?
Ironically, the seeds of the town's downfall were sown by its own economic success. By the 15th century, wealthy local landowners were moving into the town, as Craco Mayor Pino Latticercia explains.
The economic and commercial growth developed the urban centre. That grew and expanded around the tower, which was surrounded itself by the houses that belonged to the landowners.
During the following centuries, Krakow's infrastructure continued to spread, and buildings began to spring up on the surrounding slopes. Yet today, they have vanished.
A striking feature is that large parts of the new town have completely disappeared, but the old town remains largely intact, which begs the question, why then does so much of it resemble an area from a war zone?
There's a line where the old medieval settlements meet the new town, and in that new town square, it's actually sunk about 10 feet from where it used to be. The whole place has been decimated.
The explanation for this odd situation can be found underground. While the medieval site is built on solid rock, the new town sits on less stable ground, which is actually formed of different types of clay. Put simply, the new building works put ever greater pressure on this unstable ground. The result was landslides.
A landslide is a mass movement of rock and debris that usually forms on some sort of weakness. That might be a weak bed or a join between two different types of rocks, really. Landslides are lubricated by water.
The community here always coexisted with landslides, fixing buildings that were damaged and carrying on.
By the early 1960s, Craco was experiencing frequent landslides so powerful that retaining walls were constructed to keep the new town safe. But the earth continued to move.
By 1963, the landslides had caused untold damage. The entire new part of the village had slipped away down the hill. The football pitch had disappeared, and even the retaining wall that was meant to guard against landslides had gone.
Ironically, the worsening landslides were largely self-inflicted.
They reinforced the area with concrete, which was extremely heavy and required drilling. This added weight then sped up the landslide.
They found that it was actually leaking pipes and sewers and so on that were contributing to the water that was fluxing and feeding the landslide. So it's actually a man-made problem that caused the landslides, that caused the evacuation of the town.
But while landslides may have wiped out the new town, what caused such extensive damage to the medieval parts of Krakow?
The other problem that you have in this part of the world are earthquakes. And you can imagine a solid building attached to solid rock. When that shakes, it's going to start falling apart. And there was a big earthquake in 1980, and that caused major destruction with the town, and it eventually really kind of tipped it right over the edge to make it almost uninhabitable.
And this is the last abandoned house of Krakow. The last family lived here until the beginning of the 90s. Inside, you can still have signs of life. An oven, some chair on the floor, and even bottles on the fireplace.
After standing nearly 1,000 years, Krakow finally got hit with a series of calamities that it really couldn't survive.
Today, Krakow is an empty shell, a slightly spooky destination for curious tourists.
One of the ironies of the town being abandoned for so long is that it never got rebuilt That's made it a magnet for tourists today who want to see what a medieval village was like without a lot of modern infrastructure on top of it. It's even been used for a number of movies if you want to recreate what the streets of Jerusalem were like 2,000 years ago. This is a pretty good place to do it.
However, the town's tribulations have not all been in vain.
Given all of the things that have happened to this village, it's become a bit of a mecca for scientists to try and understand exactly how you can mitigate against such problems, how you can go from a perfectly working town to a destroyed town. And hopefully we'll learn something from this, from the science into the future.
In a remote forest in northern Ukraine lie the remains of a once modern and technologically advanced town that was formerly part of the Soviet Union. Overgrown and slowly being reclaimed by nature, it's a haunting sight with over 150 buildings spread across 15 square miles. This smart, rich metropolis seemed to have everything it needed to thrive and prosper. Yet the area became linked to one of the most infamous disasters in living memory. In the 1970s, it was built as a showpiece city that would help power the future of the Soviet Union. Places like this were built to attract the brightest minds and the most devoted workers. It was a purpose-built town, able to cater for up to 50,000 people. And one of those who hoped to live here was Sergei Chernov.
It was very well planned, with a beautiful environment and technological services. It was a city of young people. The average age of those living here was just 26 years old.
All around the town are clues that tell why this place was so important to the Soviets. And that also reveal the catastrophe that caused its destruction.
Right now, we're in the central square, and this building right in front was the so-called cultural building, which was called energetic. Over there on that 5-story building, there's an emotive slogan that says, "Let the atom be a worker rather than a soldier." It didn't manage to follow through on that idea, as you know.
This is Pripyat, the town built to service the infamous nuclear power plant of Chernobyl.
Reactor number 4 exploded, spewing radiation over much of Europe.
Radiation levels were expected to rise over the ensuing weeks.
The entire population was quickly evacuated.
As many as 8,000 people have died as a result of the world's worst nuclear accident.
The whole area was isolated. It signaled the end for the town. All that remains is this ghostly, deserted wasteland.
It was dangerous, as you know, to build a town in the vicinity of a nuclear plant, but that was common practice. The case of Pripyat proved how disastrous this practice was.
On the west coast of Namibia, in Africa, a mysterious settlement is preserved in an arid wasteland. In the middle of the barren landscape, a cluster of buildings unexpectedly emerge from the drifting sands.
This place, it's just super strange.
You're clearly in a desert, and you turn round, and then there's this strange cowboy-type town. But if you look a bit more in detail, it's a bit more sophisticated than that.
Some of the architecture is really quite interesting, so it makes you wonder, where did the money come from to build these lavish structures?
It's definitely a place where people wanted to be at the time, but why?
The money and people have vanished, and Mother Nature is reclaiming the town.
You've got bathtubs full of sand. You've got piles of sand as you walk into the houses. The only thing that this is home to now is the desert.
And the only signs of life are snakes and scorpions. It makes you wonder, who would ever want to have built here?
Despite the brutal sandstorms and the lack of water, a community not only thrived here, but flourished, living in apparent luxury.
Certainly, it was a place that was very affluent. They created an ice factory on site so they could actually make their own ice. They had a butcher's, they had everything that you'd kind of want for a town.
What drew them here in the first place, and why has it become such a haunted ghost town?
But who would go to such extraordinary lengths to create a luxury town in such hostile conditions? In the early 1900s, Namibia was part of German Southwest Africa. This area lay more than 500 miles from the busy British port of Cape Town, with nothing but a solitary railway track passing through to the German harbour town of Luderitz.
These areas were remote areas under exploration, so to make an area that's remote and a desert, somewhere that's a place where people can live, you need a commodity.
Soon, that commodity was unearthed.
In 1908, a local railway worker made a discovery. He found diamonds in the sand, and that changed everything.
The birth and growth of this now abandoned settlement was driven by that extraordinary discovery. This is Namibia's ghost town, Kolmanskop. Despite its remote location, local expert William Thompson reveals the wide range of luxuries enjoyed by residents here.
Now, this is where the shopkeeper used to stay, and she was also the richest lady here in Kolmanskop. On this table is a list of all the stuff that she imported from Germany. You will be amazed at everything she ordered, from camembert cheese to the finest of champagnes.
It was not just the imported goods that powered the town's growing wealth.
What I like about the buildings is that they were ingeniously designed. They'd put pieces of wood in between the bricks, and they acted a little bit like natural aircon. So they would counteract the vastly fluctuating desert temperatures.
So what caused this vibrant oasis to simply disappear? At first, it couldn't have been easier for German prospectors who flocked here to make their fortune.
We think of diamond mines being complex structures, but that wasn't how they started. I mean, really, you had men crawling on their hands and knees under the moonlight, looking for that glistening, precious stone in the sand. And they found them.
There's tales actually from the time where they would dig trenches, and the diamonds were so proliferous on the ground that you could sweep them into the trenches. You'd sweep the dust into the trenches and then have people move along the trenches picking out the diamonds.
By 1912, the area was home to one of the richest diamond deposits in the world.
Kolmanskop rapidly developed into a thriving diamond mining town. You know, at its peak, 12% of the world's diamonds were mined here.
With this explosion of wealth, a town grew to support the industry.
Despite the harsh climate and the very isolated setting, the town actually had many European luxuries.
So they had a bowling alley here. Opera singers from Europe and Germany came to perform here. They had a seawater swimming pool in the middle of the desert.
It had a theater, a performance hall. It quickly developed into a lively little haven of German culture.
But there was one very pressing problem: water.
Kolmanskop and Ludwig had no fresh water. Look, they had some underground water, but it wasn't sufficient for everyone. It wasn't enough for everyone. It was very brackish and very salty. That's a main reservoir on top of the hill. That was for the fresh water here at Kolmanskop. What they did is they imported all their fresh water all the way from Cape Town. 1,000 tons of fresh water per month.
As Kolmanskop grew rich, thanks in part to this British supply, it was able to buy its way out of water shortages. But with the dark clouds of war hanging over Europe, how long would this arrangement last? And would a lack of water finally spell disaster? While the money flowed, Kolmanskop became a center for cutting-edge technology.
A window into what was the most important thing in this town is highlighted by the fact that it was the first place ever in southern Africa to have an X-ray machine.
But that wasn't just to check for broken bones. It was to check to see if somebody had swallowed a diamond and was taking it home after work.
The beginning of the end came with the cataclysmic events of 1914.
With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, a lot of the Germans were interned, sent back to Germany and everything. But the final straw came in 1927, when extensive diamond deposits were found in the north of the Orange River mouth. And the diamonds they found there were 6 times bigger than the diamonds they found here at Kolmanskop. And I think that was where Kolmanskop hit its end.
The inhabitants of this town, on hearing that they could have something bigger and better, just literally dropped their tools, left all their possessions, and joined the rush south.
Kolmanskop struggled on. But in 1956, with the supply of diamonds exhausted, the final resident left, and the town was abandoned to the desert. Today, Kolmanskop is ghostly silent and preserved by the arid climate. Yet, discoveries in the region are still being made.
Diamonds are still being mined in Namibia, and interestingly, not so far from here, they're actually finding diamonds on the sea floor.
In Columbia County, Pennsylvania, in the USA, is a town that has been virtually wiped from the face of the earth.
It's clear that there's been some massive time break here. You know, something's gone on.
It's the victim of something that most of us couldn't believe could happen.
There are no people there. It's eerie.
Roads, neatly laid out in a grid-like system, suggest that this was once a typical American town.
Most of the buildings themselves are gone. But you can see the grid work of streets. You can see people lived here. A lot of stuff is covered with graffiti. It's very hard to figure out what actually happened here. In a way, it's a ghost town without the town.
Foundations, yet no houses. A police station, but no police force. A settlement that seems to have vanished. Are there clues that hint at some kind of natural disaster?
It's almost as though that the tarmac's all cracked up. As the ground heaved, was there an earthquake? Is that the reason why there's nobody there? It's really rather strange.
A person visiting for the first time might think that the town was a victim of some kind of volcanic activity. There's cracks visible, there's steam coming up out of the ground. It seems like some kind of a volcanic wasteland.
So why has this town been wiped from history? It's hard to believe now, but this now desolate site had been a thriving part of the rich history of American industry since the 1850s. Well served by road and rail, this was once a bustling town of some 1,400 people. It was called Centralia. Local author David de Cook remembers it as a very different place.
The shot was taken in October of 1983, looking up toward the top of town, and you can see there was an entire town there that's now gone. So it really drives home, I think, how much was lost here.
How the town vanished is a tale that's stranger than fiction. In 1979, they began to notice something very odd at the local gas station.
John Coddington's gas station had to shut down because the gasoline in the underground tanks was very hot. So the state police said, sorry, John, you've got to close. And he didn't fight it. I mean, his family lived above the station. So, he had a lot of skin in the game there.
Coddington wasn't the only Centralia resident experiencing strange happenings.
A local kid by the name of Todd Dombolski was walking in the backyard when suddenly a sinkhole opened up and he fell in. And he was able to grab hold of a tree root and keep hold of it until a friend could come and rescue him, pull him out.
It saves his life. There was a deadly amount of carbon monoxide in that hole. Chaos results, phone calls to the governor, and things were never quite the same after that.
But this brought national attention to this town's bizarre plight.
And soon, things got worse. The earth began to erupt.
When they first saw these cracks, people just wondered, what could possibly cause this? It's maybe 3 feet wide, 2.5 feet deep, and maybe as much as 20 to 30 feet long.
What was responsible for making these gaping holes and wide cracks? Speculation was rife.
For a while, at least, for several years, you would see steam coming out of this gigantic highway crack. People wondered what was causing this. They may have thought it was just some kind of volcano down there, maybe.
The cause of the steam was actually something that no one could have guessed.
What's actually happening is something that sounds impossible, which is a fire burning underground. And it's been burning for more than 50 years.
It's venting gases through any cracks and seams in the ground. You imagine if you had cellars in the houses, they could be potentially targets for escaping gases. And those gases can be poisonous. And you can imagine that fire is moving in different parts.
The fire moved under the highway. There were voluminous clouds of steam that would come out of the ground either side of the highway.
The highway closed in 1983, but the fire still burns today.
So this is a borehole, and if we unscrew this cap, we're going to see what the fire is like underneath. Ooh, nice and hot. That's heat coming up to the surface. I can smell the distinctive kind of sulfurish smell of the fire. You see these little beads of water just jumping and floating in the air. When I talked to one of the state officials recently, he said that when they last tested it, it was about 140 degrees, maybe down 25, 30 feet.
So what caused the fires that spread beneath Centralia?
So this may look like just a clearing in the forest, but back in 1962, there was a huge pit here that Centralia used as its landfill. And they wanted to clean up the dump. And the way they did that was to have some guys from the fire department come and set it on fire, burn up the stuff that could be burned, wash it down with water from a tanker truck, and then go away, and everything was supposed to be fine, but it wasn't.
Something really odd actually happened, which is a phenomenon called a coal seam fire. There's coal mine underground, and what happened is somehow the fire got into that coal area, and all of a sudden it sparked a whole new problem.
The fire would quietly burn below Centralia for the next 20 years.
What you don't see on the surface is that underneath this town, and extending far and wide, is a giant labyrinth of coal mines. And it's these coal mines that are on fire.
Centralia sits right on top of one of the richest coal mining areas in the world. So it's very difficult to figure out how to put the fire out because the underground environment is so complex.
Coal seam fires themselves are a big problem in coal areas. And obviously, as you burn away bits of the coal and you destabilize the subterranean network of tunnels and coal seams and so on, you can actually cause there to be instabilities on the surface. A sinkhole that developed, probably due to this undermining of the stability of the surface.
With no way of extinguishing the fire, the news spread, and the eyes of the world were suddenly on Centralia, meaning the federal government could not ignore the problem.
After Todd Dmowski's incident, and it got all this attention, and there were citizen groups in Centralia saying, hey, you got to get us out of here. But they still took almost 2 years to come up with a solution.
Eventually, in 1984, the entire population of Centralia was given the go-ahead to relocate, with the help of $42 million federal dollars. Now, all but a determined few of the town's inhabitants have moved on. And today, there is little evidence that the community of Centralia ever existed.
You see how quickly nature reclaims man-made space, even streets and driveways. All of that gradually starts reverting to forest.
Back when I first came here, there were a few trees, not many. Now it's like a state park.
But when will the fires beneath Centralia's empty streets stop burning?
So how long could it burn? I've heard figures like 200 years, 250 years, but in the end, nobody really knows. It'll go until it stops burning, runs out of fuel, runs out of air. Neither of those are likely to happen anytime soon.
Now they lie abandoned, but once they were the cutting edge of engineering. There are echoes of history within these decaying structures. They remind us of terror and war, but also of great innovation and human endeavor.